This book, Report from Iron Mountain. Published this week, it has been described as a fraud and the sinister work of a sick mind by some, while others call it a hair-raising analysis. The book is stirring emotions with its examination of the possibility and, more important, the desirability of world peace.
About 100 miles north of New York City in rolling hill country, there is an underground vault called Iron Mountain. Industry and government keep records there because the vault, 150 feet beneath the earth, is supposed to be atom bomb-proof. In 1963, according to the book Report from Iron Mountain, a group of 15 outstanding thinkers met there at the request of the Kennedy administration. They were asked, is the United States prepared for permanent peace? The book, The Report from Iron Mountain, says the scientists reached this conclusion. In the book's words,
lasting peace, while not theoretically impossible, is probably unattainable. Even if it could be achieved, it would almost certainly not be in the best interests of a stable society to achieve it.
There are other startling statements in the report which says it is not concerned with what is good or bad, but just with what is. It argues that without the war system, which means hot wars and cold wars, and maintaining the war threat, our society would not work. It argues that international conflicts don't cause war. They are manufactured because the war system requires them. The report from Iron Mountain says,
war itself is the basic social system. It is the system which has governed most societies of record.
The report from Iron Mountain says, victories and defeats in wars, though, are only a small part of the war system.
The non-military functions of the war system are more basic.
According to the report, which Dial Press says was brought in by a member of the study group who thought the public ought to know, the wasteful production of war is the backbone of the economy. It creates demand and prevents depression. The report from Iron Mountain says,
an economy as advanced and complex as our own requires the planned average annual destruction of not less than 10% of the gross national product.
The book asks, couldn't the same pump-priming effect be gotten by substituting massive government spending for peace on hospitals, schools, public housing, and health? The report from Iron Mountain says,
as an economic substitute for war, such a program is inadequate because it would be far too cheap.
The book argues that it is impossible to spend as much on butter as we spend on guns. The only substitute for war spending that is expensive enough and flexible enough is an open-ended space program. The report from Iron Mountain says,
if colonization of the moon proceeds on schedule, it could then become necessary to establish a beachhead on Mars or Jupiter, and so on. This kind of spending lends itself extraordinarily well to arbitrary control.
Vital as the war system is economically, it is more important politically. The report from Iron Mountain says,
the war system not only has been essential to the existence of nations as independent political entities, but has been equally indispensable to their stable internal structure.
Citizens obey the government because only the government can protect them from outside enemies. As for international relationships, they have always depended ultimately on force. The book says, in a world without threat, external enemies would have to be manufactured to promote allegiance by citizens and to prevent social disintegration. The report from Iron Mountain says,
experiments have been proposed to test the credibility of an out-of-our-world invasion threat. It is possible that a few of the more difficult-to-explain flying saucer incidents of recent years were in fact early experiments of this kind.
If permanent peace does come, asks the book, what would be done with the millions of young men in the armed forces? If they were on the street without jobs, they would be a source of social unrest. The report from Iron Mountain says,
it is entirely possible that the development of a sophisticated form of slavery may be an absolute prerequisite for social control in a world at peace.
The report argues that war serves biological purposes as well. It helps control population and prevents famine. The report from Iron Mountain says,
nuclear weapons are indiscriminate. Their application would bring to an end the disproportionate destruction of the physically stronger members of the species. Whether this prospect of genetic gain would offset the unfavorable mutations anticipated from post-nuclear radioactivity, we have not yet determined.
If peace should ever come, the study group recommends population control by artificial insemination and scientific breeding. As for science itself, the book says, without war, progress will be slow. The report from Iron Mountain says,
war is the principal motivational force for the development of science at every level.
The assembly line grew out of firearm needs in the Civil War. The steel frame building did not come until the first steel battleship had been launched. The report from Iron Mountain says,
the most direct relationship can be found in medical technology. The Vietnam War alone has led to spectacular improvements in amputation procedures, blood handling techniques, and surgical logistics. It has stimulated new large-scale research on malaria and other tropical diseases. It is hard to estimate how long this work would otherwise have been delayed, despite its enormous non-military importance to nearly half of the world's population.
The study group at Iron Mountain clearly equates war with survival. Should we then strive for disarmament and peace? Does peace really mean chaos? The report from Iron Mountain concludes,
no program or combination of programs yet proposed for a transition to peace has remotely approached meeting the comprehensive functional requirements of a world without war. It is the war system that must be identified with stability. The war system cannot responsibly be allowed to disappear until we know exactly what it is we plan to put in its place.
The most interesting thing about this book is the number of people who are willing to believe that serious people in the government think this way. So these are presumably people who are anxious to feel the worst of their government, or that somehow there's something very, very wrong there. Now, in some ways, I yield to no one in my criticism of the U.S. government, you know, in the sense, I wouldn't dream that people could think this way. See, the second thing about...
Do you think that says anything about today's times and feelings?
Oh, sure. Yeah, a book like this would not have been taken seriously 2 years ago. This has to do with the CIA, with Vietnam, with the race riots, with poverty issues, all kinds of things like that.
When you say 2 years ago we weren't in this distressed state, I guess is what you mean.
We were not as upset as we are today. I think this is more than satire. It's overwritten satire.
It's bad satire.
Well, it isn't bad because it's got accepted. So, I mean, I'm wrong. There are people who are willing to think that the government thinks this way. They exist, and they presumably are in no small numbers. Otherwise, the book would not take...
Do you think there are businessmen who think this way? I don't mean in support of the book, that believe that the economy works this way.
No, let's be fair about the matter. I would argue a majority of Americans believe that war makes the economy prosperous. That belief is widely held. A lot of people believe that, in government and out of government. More people out of government than in government. And there are many things said in this book which many people believe.
Have any societies, though, ever used war to keep themselves together?
There's no question that there have occasionally been decision makers who have tried to head off problems by the use of military adventures. This is not a completely uncommon thing. It's not very common either, by the way. It's too dangerous.
Report from Iron Mountain. Fiction? Yes. But what truth does it contain?